Hey, so glad you're back with us for another Goldseek.com Radio Gold Nugget segment. Today's special guest, Gerald Celente from the Trends Research Institute. The Great Recession officially ended in 2009. Still, half of the U.S. is either near or at the poverty level. So if this is a recovery, then just how bad will conditions be when we reach the next recession? Joining me with this and his take on related current events, Gerald Celente, the director of Trends Research Institute. His team produces the Trends Journal with hard-hitting, in-depth analysis of economic and socio-political trends. Welcome back, Gerald Celente.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
Well, you know, while the streets in USOS of A may not look like those of Cyprus or Greece, given the deterioration of conditions in the middle class, it would seem like this nation could be headed for something similar as Southern Europe. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely, Ken. The only reason this economy's anywhere where it is because of all of this so-called quantitative easing. And at some point it's going to have to end, and things will change. So we're going to see it severely deteriorate once this so-called money pumping scheme is over. And at some point it'll have to be over because they cannot continue to debase the currency on an ongoing basis as they're doing now.
I wanted to share this interesting quote of Thomas Jefferson. You've probably read it many times, and I know many of the listeners will have as well, but I think it might bear repeating here. You know, if the American people ever allow private banks to control the issuance of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, it will deprive the people of all property until their children wake up homeless on the continent their fathers conquered. Sound familiar?
Yes, it does. And it is one quote after another that says basically the same thing. And you go back to James Madison, and he was talking about the money changers. It wasn't as though it stopped with Jesus Christ. He said history records that the money changers have used every form of abuse, intrigue, deceit, and violent means possible to maintain their control over governments by controlling money and its issuance. And that's all they're doing. They're controlling money and its issuance, and they'll do it by any means.
And I'm on board with you, but how much responsibility falls on the shoulders of us, the typical Americans out there? I mean, sure, we've been dumbed down, certainly have gotten a skewed outlook from much of the media. But, you know, there's an awful lot of folks out there, including yourself and this show and Goldseek.com and many others, who have been trying to educate folks for decades now. How much of this is our fault, and, at what point are folks going to wake up? Will it be too late?
It's very funny you asked that, Chris. The new Trends Journal will be out in a few weeks, and it begins with the I don't want to hear it trend, about how people, you tell them all the facts, you tell them everything that they need to know, and they say, I don't want to hear about it. And we hear it all the time. You give them fact after fact, and they say, I don't want to hear it. Why? Is it because they don't have the courage to hear it? Is it because they're afraid to hear it because then that means they're going to have to take action? Or they are just too locked into their belief systems to want to hear anything else? But the fact of the matter is, until they hear it, until they act on it, nothing is going to change. I was at a party last night, and as you know, I've been buying historic buildings here in colonial Kingston, New York, about an hour and 45 minutes north of New York City. And I said, and I've been on the media saying it, that one of the reasons I've bought them is because this is where the first American Revolution had its roots, and I'd like to see the second American Revolution, but not one of bombs or bullets or armies, but of mind, spirit, and heart. And the person said to me, oh, so you want a counterbalance to what's going on now? And I said, no. I said, I'm sick of what's going on now. I'm sick of people like Pelosi and McConnell and Boner and Reid and Obamas and Clintons and Bushes and Cheneys. I'm sick of all of them telling me what I should believe, what I should do, and why I should behave. I've had it. And until the people have had enough, it's like that movie network. I'm not going to take it anymore. And that's when that happens, then we will have positive change. But now, right now, people are nothing more than serfs to their political idols.
When you talk to so many folks today, you do hear almost a rote response. Well, that's so negative. I really want to try to keep a more positive outlook. And I think you'd agree, a healthy psychological attitude is important regardless how bad things are. I think there's also times, and you'd probably agree, when you have to get past this ideology of positivity, always positive, and recognize maybe it's not so negative if we start preparing now. In other words, it doesn't have to be such a catastrophic Cyprus-like event if everybody within earshot starts to make some contingency plans.
Amen. And I could give you examples. We're heading toward an iceberg. Don't worry about it. Hey, wasn't dinner great? And doesn't the band sound wonderful? The fire in the North Tower is under control. Go back to your offices. The people have a responsibility, and they refuse to take action. They know the truth. They just don't want to do it. So again, until the people really rise up and take action and take measures against what's going on, everybody knows the deal. We bailed out the too big to fail banks. Who made that baloney up? Whether it's austerity measures in Europe or bailing out the big guys here, you have a mafia that's in control. It's the money changer mafia. It's the banks that are running the governments, and on the other hand, it's the military-industrial complex. And people don't want to face the facts about it. They all know the details, but they don't want to admit to them.
Keeping with your thoughts there on banking collusion, President Jefferson went on with that quote. He said, "I believe that banking institutions are more dangerous to our liberties than standing armies. The issuing power should be taken away from banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. This fractional reserve system works well until the end game, where the world, I think, is finding itself right now, and the inevitable result will be just as it was in the past, wealth redistribution to the top of the pyramid while inflation destroys the lower 95%.
Well, it's already happening. Median household incomes below 1999 levels. The talk about the 1% having the majority is reality. Again, the jobs created since the recession began, middle wage income jobs were lost, low income jobs are being created. The gap between the rich and the poor is the widest in the United States than any of the industrialized nations. So the facts are there for everyone to look at. But again, are you going to take action, or are you going to, just go down with the ship and not move? Because I have to tell you, right now the vacuum has never been greater. It could be filled with anything. And what I would like to see it filled with is what this country used to be, a great entrepreneurial opportunity before the takeover happened. And the takeover is real. I'm young enough to remember this little quaint thing when pharmacies were owned by the local people in the area, the community. I remember when there were hardware stores before Lowe's and Home Depot. I remember when there were stationery stores before Staples and Office Depot. And I remember when there were no Walmarts and there were entrepreneurs that were selling goods. I remember when there were two Macy's, one in Herald Square and one up in Yonkers. And now they're everywhere. It's a takeover. It's a takeover, a corporate takeover, and it's the merger of state and corporate powers. And as you go back to the money changers, and as you say what Jefferson said and what I say what Madison said, to me that's why gold prices aren't going up. Because there's a takeover. And the takeover is that they're printing all of this digital money, and you mentioned about Japan, the $1.4 trillion that they're dumping in stimulus now. All the currency should be crashing. But no, they're not. Why? Well, look, they fixed the LIBOR rate, didn't they? They rigged hundreds of trillions of dollars on fixing interest rates. We know that they're rigging the bond game. It's right in front of us. The Fed and other countries are buying bonds up. They're rigging the game. They're not lying about it. They're doing it. And I believe they're rigging the gold market because when people realize how much they're debasing the currencies, they're going to go into gold. And when that happens, the whole Ponzi scheme collapses.
Yeah, I think we're on the same page here. I mean, you can recall John Maynard Keynes' quote, who supposedly said, "There's no surer way to destroy a country than to debase its currency." Wow, what a haunting example that is. I mean, aren't the developed nations of the world, Bank of Japan, Bank of England, European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, the Central Bank of China, are they not following this path of currency destruction, and will it not lead to the implosion of global economy? What do you think?
It has to. It has to. And really, people know this. This isn't, I just did an interview, an international interview, and they said, but how about all these smart people? You know, all these bankers that are making these moves. And I said, what smart people? I said, who are you talking about? The Federal Reserve? Go back to the minutes 5 years ago. Every one of them got it wrong. They said we weren't even going to go into a recession. They said there was no mortgage crisis. You know, so why listen to them? Why not look at the facts and just add them up yourself? You know, before you were talking about optimism and pessimism. It's not about that. You go to a doctor, you get a diagnosis. You don't call a doctor an optimist or a pessimist. It's what it is. But people are so juvenile and so afraid to look at what is, they want to put a label on it. Oh, you're a gloom and doomer. Oh, you're a pessimist. Do you call a doctor a gloom and doomer?
We certainly don't call the weatherman a gloom and doomer when he says there's an F5 tornado headed towards our city or a Category 5 hurricane headed towards a Gulf community. All right, I'd also like to shift the discussion to an alternative currency that took the world by storm, was hit by a storm. Over the past 2 months, the digital currency Bitcoin exploded from under $10 to over $265 this week, then collapsed in one day by about half that figure. Clearly, the anonymity is what drove people to this coin and to this currency. But in reality, the global currency system, as it unravels, I don't think folks are going to trust this type of digital technology with most of their wealth. There'll always be a market for it. It seems like gold and silver would be the better alternatives. What are your thoughts, please?
Let's the Bitcoin. I've always said I didn't know enough about it, and it didn't seem real enough to me to make it. That it was going to go very far or spread very wide. And again, I made it very clear I would never call myself an expert in that field. That was just my feelings on gold and silver. Let's suppose we were Greek Cypriots, and they closed the bank on a Saturday, and all the ATM machines were empty. And they told us they were going to open it up on Tuesday. Tuesday comes around, it's still closed. Then they say they're going to open up on Thursday. Thursday comes around, it's still closed. Then they say they're going to open up next Tuesday. And next Tuesday comes around, it's still closed. You think wish you had some gold or silver? You think gold or silver could have bought you what you needed? If there was ever a case of why you want gold or silver as an alternative to the fiat currencies, the Cyprus incident was the perfect one to show the reality of the situation to me. Secondly, hey, I just read that Cyprus is going to sell $400 million worth of gold to help pay for their bailout problem. But didn't I hear Ben Bernanke say that gold wasn't money? Guess it is. And I guess the Greek Cypriots, for them, it's the safe haven currency. It's the only thing they have.
And if I could echo Peter Schiff's sentiments here on the show, gold and silver are real money. It's not even a currency. Even many of us in this field, we forget that currencies are fiat. The real thing is the solid precious metals. And as you say, if the ATMs stop working tomorrow, as we saw in Cyprus, and suddenly there's a banking holiday, who knows, maybe next time around, even insured accounts get wiped out. That raises an interesting point we've been talking about this week on the show. Some analysts are pointing to the FDIC bail-in possibilities there, putting many savers on the hook for too big to fail banks if the FDIC runs low on funds. And of course, as you know, they're already short on funds. What do you think?
Well, we're going to write about that extensively in the Spring Trends Journal that will be out in about 10 days. And the article is being written by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, as you well know, was the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, we just had him on the show.
Okay, so he doesn't believe so. And he's read a lot of the information coming out of Canada, out of New Zealand, a lot of this speculation, commentators' websites, and he makes it very clear that he believes it's going to be they'll just print more money to cover the losses, and in doing so keep debasing the currency. And I tend to agree with him. And also, you know, this bail-in issue. Let's go back and look what happened in the United States when they did have a bank holiday. As you well know, and everybody listens to your show, they made people turn in gold. What was it, at $20.65 an ounce? And then after they thought they got it all in, and the people sold it to the government at that price, they raised the price to $25 an ounce, which means you just took a loss. And so that's the kind of thing I think they're going to do. It's going to be a currency debasement rather than an outright theft. So the theft will be the same, but the way it's done, whether it's pickpocketing or taking your bank account, the result will be the same. What you have will buy less.
I think it's well said, and I do agree with you that they will more than likely put restrictions on precious metals, and for instance, you may be able to own them, but it's becoming increasingly difficult to sell. We just saw a big video this week, and it's actually been in the works for some time. In Houston, all sellers of gold, any gold coins whatsoever now, must submit to having their fingerprints taken. And, of course, the argument here, this is okay because we want to make sure if somebody steals your gold that they're not going to be able to get away with it.
This is what goes on in a fascist society. And you've heard me say it before. You know, it's not my definition. It's the merger of state and corporate powers. And that's exactly what happened. Four words killed capitalism. Too big to fail. Look what's going on. I mean, whether it's the warrantless wiretapping, whether it's the National Defense Authorization Act, one after another. The IRS could monitor and look at anything that we're doing and watch us all the time. So, no, we don't have any freedoms. We're losing them. One by one by one. And the more societies break down, the more they clamp down on freedoms. They want to know where all the gold is. And I believe, as I said, if there's any case to be made why someone should consider owning gold, you cannot find a better example than with Cyprus. The banks were closed almost 2 weeks. So now put it like this. You don't have any money. Nobody does. And you need something. And you have some gold and silver. Not only do you think you're going to find someone that's going to take it in exchange for their product or service or drugs, whatever you might need, medical help, and if they do it, you think they're going to give you more than the value? Of course they will, I believe. So if I'm selling oil or fuel oil, whatever it might be, and someone comes to me with gold or euros, who am I going to give the better deal to at a time when the banks are closed?
I'm going to return, if I could, here to Bitcoin for a moment. The parallels between Bitcoin and silver are really interesting here. Just a few months ago, Bitcoins were trading as low as roughly $2 or $3. Fast forward a few months, 100-fold increase. Suddenly, people recognized this is a viable currency. Guess what money, real money out there, people laugh about? You try to suggest that those silver coins sitting in a piggy bank is real money. They're laughing about it. Well, they might not be laughing so hard if one of these scenarios that you've been talking about here on Goldseek.com radio and the Trends Journal for years actually comes to fruition. They're not going to be laughing so hard. I suggest that we could see a super spike just as we did in Bitcoins, maybe in not so distant future.
Oh, I agree. I think it's building up, and there's only going to be some point where they can no longer short the markets as they are now. And again, that's what Dr. Paul Craig Roberts believes as well. And again, if anybody doesn't think that gold is money, you should also tell the Iranians and the Chinese, because the Iranians are selling oil to China, and China and other countries are paying them with gold. So, hey, you want to argue with them and tell them it's not money? Then great, but you're probably a couple of $100 billion out of the game by this point, because as you know, because of the sanctions put on Iran by the United States, NATO, and the Arab Little League, it's very difficult for them to do transactions through banks. So they're doing it through gold. And again, the proof is there. I mentioned Cyprus. They're selling $400 million worth of gold to pay off their bad debts. So what are they selling? Valuable assets. And by the way, this is also helping drive down the price of gold.
Ted Butler claims that the COMEX has about 100 million ounces of silver. I heard that was knocked down by 10% today, though, to cover those billions of ounces of naked short derivatives out there. Now, I know that aficionados out there are going to say, well, we know this story, but I think that people have to keep their minds around the concept of a serious force majeure and short squeeze.
Yeah, and again, anything, they rig the LIBOR rates. I mean, they're doing everything. I mean, we don't know what's going on. Look at all the insider trading coming in, and it could go either way any time. But for the long term, for me, and again, only speaking for myself because I don't give financial advice, I'm in gold for my golden years. I don't speculate with gold, I buy gold. And to me, that's the future. Because look, I mean, you think we're going to be creating high-paying jobs in the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? Look at the trade deficit. What is it coming in at? Around $540 billion a year, every year. So, I mean, how are you going to pay this off? You're going to pay it off by printing more digital money not worth the paper it's not printed on.
In the past, bankruptcy was a viable solution. It really isn't since about 2005 now. The rules of the game have simply changed. It's really difficult to discharge your debt. People are regularly incarcerated for even minor infractions. You miss a car payment, a utility bill, bingo, you're escorted to a holding cell. Could you outline your thoughts on the dangers of debt and steps that every American can take to avoid these debt traps?
They pulled the Ponzi scheme following 9/11, and people forgot that we were in a recession. The dot-com bubble had burst in March of 2000. And what they did was began to lower interest rates to 40-year lows and cajole people into, mortgaging their future. You want to go on that vacation? Take out a home equity loan. When I was a kid, they were called second mortgages. So they're doing the same thing now with these record low interest rates. I bought a historic building. I pay 2.875% interest. 15 years locked in. Knock on wood, I could afford to do it. But people are going in over their heads. So as I look at it, again, only speaking for myself, now is the time to have no debt. And a good friend of mine, by the way, I like his strategy the best. Each month he buys what he could afford in gold and silver. Now, when you average that out and look at over a long term, you're really ahead of the game. You could take a $200,000, $300,000 hit down after you've been buying it for, $700, $800, $900, $1,000, $1,500 highs. So, moving up the ladder. So to me, that's the kind of strategy to consider. And, of course, I would never recommend anyone go into debt. And I really feel sorry for these college students that are taking out all this money. I mean, who can make this stuff up? Student debt total is in excess of $1 trillion now, very similar to the credit card bubble that we saw around the credit crisis.
Education, very important. I'm a big proponent of education, but we're going to have to start looking for more economical solutions. Well, Gerald Celente, head of the Trends Research Institute, his team produces the Trends Journal. I wish you could tell folks more.
Well, the next Trends Journal is a lot about the I don't want to hear it trend, what the new big trends are going to be in new millennium education, some new energy breakthroughs that are very worthwhile looking at and considering to go into the future with if you're an investor. And, of course, there's articles by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts and others. There's always articles on health, nutrition, fitness, in a variety of different journals. And every day, Monday through Friday, at 6:30, I do Trends in the News features, the hot topics of the day, what they mean, and where the future is heading. You'll hear about what's going on geopolitically, politically, economically, and the events that really matter. It's truly history before it happened.
Gerald Celente, we always appreciate your thoughts and comments, sir. We want to wish you continued success.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Chris, and same to you. Bye-bye.